A warm welcome to all of you. I think we can continue with the first session of our workshop. You will allow me to introduce the speakers in Greek. I think you know each other very well. You don't need to hear who is who. Θα αρχίσουμε με την πρώτη συνεδρία της σημερινής συνάντησης. Ο πρώτος ομιλητής, έχουμε τη χαρά να έχουμε κοντά μας τον καθηγητή της Ιστορικής και Συγκριτικής Γλωσσολογίας στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Κολονίας, Χωσέ Λουίς Γκαρσία Ραμόν. Είναι ένας, από το 1995, ο τακτικός καθηγητής στην έδρα αυτή στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Κολονίας. Προηγουμένως υπήρξε καθηγητής κλασικής φιλολογίας στο Αυτόνομο Πανεπιστήμιο της Μαδρίτης. Ένας επιστήμονας πολυγραφότατος. Περιορίζομαι να αναφέρω μόνο δύο έργα του. Μια μονογραφία, Les origines post-mycénaines du groupe Διαλέκτους Léolien, Σαλαμάνκα 1975, και περιμένουμε από αυτόν ένα εγχειρίδιο για την μικηναϊκή διάλεκτο. Είπα ότι είναι πολυγραφότατος, έχει συγγράψει πάνω από 165 άρθρα και άρθρα σε επιστημονικά περιοδικά ή σε εγκυκλοπαίδειες. Σήμερα θα μας μιλήσει για την αρχαία ελληνική διαλεκτολογία, παλιά και καινούρια ερωτήματα, πρόσφατες εξελίξεις, Ancient Greek Dialectology, Old and New Questions, Recent Developments. Mr. Garcia Ramon, please.
This one. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, dear colleague, for your warm presentations. And thank you to all of you for having invited me to attend this highly interesting conference. And thank you to all of you for being there. The aim of the present paper is not exactly to give a general overview on Greek dialects today, but simply follow the title of the paper. But the paper, the title is in itself a little bit conventional. Some 30 years ago, we have had the first meeting on Greek dialects in Pont-à-Mousson in France. And it was about, the first presentation was about Vieux Chemin, Sentier Nouveau, new paths, yeah? In fact, when we speak about old and new questions, it is a conventional formulation because actually the important is not whether the questions are old or new, but if they are clever or absurd, and especially if they can get an answer. At this point, I assume it would be not necessary to attempt to give here an overview of the work which has been done in the last times, or the work which is being done now, yeah? Because this would lead to endless repetitions, and even worse, to the obligation to give an opinion of everything who has been done, which is probably beyond the limits of our competence of one person or even of more. Yeah? At this point, I will concentrate in some trends of research which has been followed in the last years. But probably it would be good if I say from the beginning, at the random, that I am not sure that these lines are exactly the most productive. In other words, my paper will focus for the most part in some questions of dialectal reconstruction and prehistory. And I shall deal with these matters because they have been the object of new developments. This is not meant to say that I am sure that these ways are productive. If we take into consideration the richness of the documents which we get practically every year for every dialect and for every region, and which are really a source of interesting and attractive researches. Yeah. Well, also to start with, I would love have an overview of 3 dimensions in the domain of the dialectology, which have always been and keep on being productive and highly interesting. Also, if we have a look on the first page, we have a 3-fold dimension. On the one part, the synchronic approach to the dialects with his variegated problematic. And at this point, number 1, we can imagine that this task remain open practically every year in the light of new data. The main subject is the dialects and their history. And at this point, it is superfluous to say that an accurate description of the facts and an attempt to interpret it is exactly what we have to do. This is clear, and this has always been done, and it will in the future so. I quote here some, in a very, very subjective selection, some papers which remain in our memory as classic, works of Lejeune on Thessalian epigraphy, of Morpurgo on soft concrete points, or to my mind too also of Botero about patronymic in Beotian, and so on. Yeah? There is also plenty to do, of course, and has been done with success on the domain on the connection and interrelations between script and phonetics. And we think and excellent researches and line marking researches by Briggs or Méndez d'Osuna in the domain of phonetics. Again, the selection here is rather subjective and has no attempt at all to be a canon of what is nice to do. We know that this type of approach is productive. Yeah? The conception of the dialect as a system has been exposed by Rui Pérez in his epochal paper on the vowel system in Attic. And needless to say, the dream for all of us would to be if we could able to establish and to define, to set out a system, a synchronic system for the different stages of a dialect. Yeah? At this point, we are confronted with a hard reality, namely that the data are not so rich as one had to desire to get a complete picture, synchronic picture of every dialect in a given time as a système où tout se tient. The fascinating problem of the length straight and add straight and so on, which has always been present. We are aware that practically in all regions there are people in contact who do not speak the same dialect and even the same language. Yeah? This is very clear. Yeah? One problem will be if we can get a correct approach to the problematic strictly on the basis of the epigraphic material. There are also more approaches of a wide perspective, namely the approach leading to include the dialect in the history of the region or in the ecology of the region or in the geography of the region. Yeah? Again, we shall be always confronted, and this is banal to say this, between the material we have at disposal and the information it provides us with. But I can certainly remember nice works about politic of the language, as in Ptolemaic Kingdom, as by Crespo, or on the interconnections between religion, history, and dialect in Oropos by Morpurgo, and plenty of others. Yeah, and if I may also follow in this subjective line, yeah, the wonderful paper of Claude Briggs about the use of the Laconian or pseudo-Laconian or hyper-Laconian in the inscriptions and his nice distribution according to the type of the inscription, yeah, also in the year 95, yeah. There are plenty two domains in which dialects may be researched and bring something new in other disciplines, and vice versa. And there is the case of lexicon, and this is fascinating domain, rather more interesting in my opinion than reconstruction now today, and lexicon. And in other cases, we have confronted with a situation of ad desideratum, namely in the case of syntax. Yeah? It has always been said that it is a pity that attention is not enough paid to syntax of the inscriptions, but actually we remember a couple of meetings about syntax, and the result were practically very, very banal, simply because the syntax of the inscriptions is directly the syntax of the Attic prose, and this is a very amazing exercise in some cases. We could say exaggerately, certainly exaggerating a little bit that apart from Elian with his mad optatives with K, also practically in all text we are able to recognize syntax which is matching the patterns of Hellenistic Greek or supradialectal Greek. Yeah. Also, in this case, I can quote, and you are not here to hear my personal experiences, yeah, but these personal experiences could belong to all, yeah. The discovering is a very characteristic thing in the case of the Thessalian inscriptions, that you get a text in which everything is extremely wild dialectal, yeah, and if you are able to understand the text and to put it in Attic Greek, you recognize that they are full of syntax taken from Polybius or even from other poets. Yeah? In this wonderful inscription of Larissa, which has been edited by my friend Bruno Eli and myself, it was an incredible, amazing text, 5 lines, yeah, not more, containing really a Greek Roman of a child who has been kidnapped by pirates and has been serving as a slave in Sicilia, and so on and so on. Yeah, the text was really leserfeindlich, really a find for the reader. Yeah, but once we have got the sense and we have a look on the phraseology, you can say as a phrase like that the man bought the child and made him free and master of himself. And the phrase, the phraseology, master of himself, is found in a poet of secondary rank when you say, if you marry, you are not anymore master of yourself. Yeah? And many of the phrases are taken directly from the Kanzlei prosa of the time. Yeah? This is very fascinating, and plenty to say about this. But it is, on the other hand, no need to complain that syntax is not always subject of interest, yeah, for dialect, because probably the syntax is not very rich at this point. Yeah, Also Crespo is here, and he has researched the moods in different inscriptions. Yeah, I assume that apart from Elis, there are not plenty to say. Yeah. Well, this is a kind of review, yeah, of the many things we can do. Yeah, and in this case, it is no exaggeration if we assume that the old and new problems are always the same, but they are simply renewed every year when we have a look on Supplementum Epigraphicum Graecum, or eventually in a new grammar. Yeah? We know that there are plenty of grammars of different quality and so, but in this case, once we have new texts, we may be confronted with new situations, and we need of new explanations. Yeah? This is the point, please, number 1A, on the case of the forms of the dative plural in the different languages. Yeah? In this case, one tends to research the problems of one dialect, but very often we have to have a look abroad and even in other languages to get a complete picture of the problem. Yeah? I could please call your attention to number 1A. In the case of a new form, cannot say, the form is edited in the year 89, yeah? A form like tespiesi in Elean judgment, yeah, of the 5th century. Yeah? This form brings to a reconsideration of the dossier of the dative plural in this very region, yeah? In which there are practically as much as types as forms. We have A, B, and C. We can recognize forms which are purely dative in esi, like figadesi, this is clear. Yeah? We have clear-cut, recognizable dative in ois, which can hardly be Aetolian ois datives, because they are attested as early as 6th century before Christ, hrematois, later we have agonois, and suddenly we have a form tespiesi, we are in point C, which bring our attention to the old and much discussed form mantinesi, which has been subject of several discussions. Yeah? The case is as follows. Mantinesi is not very clear. In these inscriptions where mantinesi, I renounce to put the accents, the form is attested in an inscription of the Skilunter, where we have doppel sigma inconsequently noted. Yeah? And in fact, what we can imagine is that tespiesi reach the same position as mantinesi. And these are clear datives of names in eus, in eu. Yeah? And in this case, we have a new type, namely the C datives with double S, yeah, which are started from an analogical proportion as proposed in point 2, and on the model of the S stems of the type aletes or yeah. In other words, once the gamma has been lost, the paradigm of both stems are confluent, as we see in the first table with S and eu. We have in common the genitives, the accusative, genitive, dative singular, and so on and so on. And according to this proportion, we can get simply, without any problem, a dative in E, C with double is, which is secondary. And the same applies for the stems in E. And so we can get an explanation for some curious form of dative plural in Lesbian and Cyrenian with a unexplained and unexpected doppel S. In this constellation, we can turn back to the Elean form and assume that the SPSC in an inscription where sigma is inconsequently noted could be concealed exactly the same time. And we get finally with the amazing situation that a dialect which has 6 or 7 or height at the highest inscription forms of dative plural shows 3 different allomorphs for the same. You can imagine that this situation, it is banal to say, can be repeated every time that we get a new inscription. Yeah? In a second block of problems and approaches, we could deal with the connections between dialect and other dialects or supra-dialectal languages. There are plenty of them, yeah, also official Koine and other Koinai, practically in every region, yeah, on the basis of the Koine. This is well known, yeah. And we know that this is a really attractive and delightful field to establish the connections between the dialectal forms and the forms which are dialectally colored, yeah. In this case, I can only remember, again, a subjective remembering, yeah, of two wonderful papers, the one by García Teijeiro, the other by Claude Briggs, on showing that form which really look as interestingly dialectal are actually a colorization, a dialectalization by color of something which is taken from the supradialectal language in the inscriptions. It's the case of U Bolemenus in Pamphylian, a language, a dialect where the article does not exist actually, and O Bolemenus is actually simply the transposition of Ho Bulomenos. And his is no real form. The real form is attested in the aorist Ebolase2, please, epsilon, because alpha, yeah? And the paper of Briggs, which is only one of some papers, because they have written more of them, yeah? I remember with admiration this paper on the use and the control over the dialect in the case of a group of inscriptions in Creta, yeah? Also, well, he tries to present the coexistence of dialect and non-dialect and explains, according to the mastering of the language or the dialect by the person, and the aim to use the dialect or not to use the dialect according to destinati of the inscription, yeah? Also, this type of works is really amazing and fascinating, yeah? And very promising too. A third group, and we turn now to what will be actually the main topic of this presentation, is the well-known problematic of the reconstruction of the dialect prehistory. At this time, well, it has, so to say, till the middle of the 70s, practically all work on dialects has been dealing with the prehistory of the dialect, yeah? And in symptomatically, we have a look on the handbooks, they start always with the prehistory of the dialect, yeah? And this has certainly led to exaggerations, because has led also to forget that the most direct subject of research is the dialect itself and not only his prehistory. But apart from this, we have major problems, namely the connection in the reconstruction of the dialects and their connections to each other. And then we have dealing with the criteria for classification and so on and so on, yeah? I shall not speak at any case, neither about Mycenaean, not about the position of Macedonian. Last one is a major subject of this conference and will be by a specialist at this point, yeah? Turning back to our starting point, yeah, the most fascinating problem is certainly the reconstruction of the prehistory of the dialects, obviously on the basis of the synchronic study of the dialects. This is clear, yeah? And at this point, there are some criteria which has been dealt with, and yeah, we are aware of this. A priori, one can imagine that when two dialects which are geographically separated and show increasing high or a high quantity of coincidences, the coincidences could be either parallel and accidental, or maybe due to a connection sometime in the history or sometime in the prehistory. And this could be something like a genetic connection or prehistoric connection like that, yeah? Then at this point we can imagine, and this is again common wisdom, that archaisms are less proving that common innovations, but that practically everything must be taken into consideration with a high degree of circumspection, and not to be sure that everything that is coincident can be explained in terms of inherited. This is common sense again, yeah? In this paper I will insist on a couple of points which belong also to elementary logic, but which are often ignored or exaggeratedly criticized, yeah? namely the case of the accumulative evidence and the importance of the extremely strange forms which are coincident. Well, if you have a look shortly in the page 4, we can recognize what has been, at least when I was a student, and it is also not so bad, the vulgata, so to say, in the case of reconstruction of the prehistory of the Greek dialects. Again, this must be only rely on the basis of the synchronic study on the dialects in the best terms, taking into consideration phonetics and graphics, morphology, and so on and so on. Yeah? And in this case, the number 5, I remember it was a kind of Bible for someone dealing with the reconstruction of the Greek dialects and the dialectal grouping of Greek. Yeah? This is, in the essential, the table of Risch. And the idea is clear, you know, that everything which is a schema is open to criticism, but in the case when we take some significant features, the coincidences between languages which are geographically separated may suggest a kind of connection. Yeah? And this was what has been always said. Yeah, from Ionian to Cyprian, we have East or South Greek. From Northwest Greek and Doric, we have West Greek, and the others are the so-called Aeolic group. I assume that this table, with all his schematic problematic, yeah, is actually to be renewed. Yeah, and actually, if we take into consideration new facts, we can fill some gaps in this tablet. For example, the number 11, excuse me, this is an error. Yeah, we could add, yeah, in number 11, yeah, we now know today that the nominative plural of the article is actually attested in all Thessaly. We have toi in an inscription of Atrax, which is not yet published, but is down to me thanks to the generosity of Bruno Eli. Yeah? And another gap concerning number 7, I mean the adverbs of the type, or conjunctions of the type hote, pote, and so on, yeah? Tote, ota, hota, pota, tota, and so on, yeah? We now really, beyond any doubt, that the Thessalian type is identical with lesbian, with ta, because the form is clearly attested. Yeah? Again, this tablet, being very schematic, could be enlarged. We can establish a further difference between East or South Greek and North or West Greek. Yeah, the first plural men, mes, the aorist, etean, against eten, protos, pratos, and so on and so on. Yeah. Well, this is things which has always been said, yeah, and we cannot ignore that this kind of reconstruction relies on a very reduced number of features, yeah, and the question is if this is credible or not. Well, at this point, I would say that programmatically that I shall make the case for the importance of 3 criteria to evaluate the coincidences among languages, among dialects being separated. And I assume that this is also questions of common sense, yeah? Not only of common wisdom. But I have to argue for this in the following minutes. Yeah? At any case, we can assume 3 points as the starting point. We can assume that to compare, we have to know, and we have to be sure that the elements for comparison are actually attested. This is why the number of features to be taken into consideration are rather reduced, because not all forms of a dialect are available to us in the inscriptions. And very often one is expecting from the dialects much more from which they can offer, actually. If this is a major problem or not so bad, will remain open. A second point, B, we are again in point B, is the importance, in my opinion, of the strange forms, the philological criterion of the forma difficilior. Obviously, a coincidence in banal matters can be also banal, but if the coincidence is in an aberrant form, either we are dealing with fully separated things, or the coincidence could be significant. This is a major point. And I would say the higher is the strange character of the form, the most plausible is to assume that this cannot be due to a casual evolution. Yeah? And a third point, which sounds very bad, but has, in my opinion, to do with common sense, is the principle of the cumulative evidence. In other words, we can take the formulation by Sherlock Holmes when he says, each fact is suggestive in itself. Together they have a cumulative force. Yeah? Obviously, we can get no exact parameters, yeah? But that the Northwest Greek dialects and the Doric dialects, stricto sensu, are very, very similar. It goes beyond any doubt, even if one finds that there are differences. Yeah? At this point, I fear I cannot follow my friend Mendez Osuna when he tries to get into sharply into the question whether New Northwest are more or less different within Doric. Yeah? The question is that we have a look on Delphian inscriptions, we recognize that this is not Laconian, yeah? But obviously enough, this is a secondary point. Well, we can now surely turn to article who has been very influential in the 80s, and we can take the major points in B, namely about the so-called manifesto of Briggs, Bill, and Odo in the year 84. Yeah? This manifesto has got a major influence, and in some aspects the results have been interesting. In other points, it has led to a catastrophe, in my opinion. Yeah? But this is very personal opinion, and I shall try to argue in this line. Yeah? It is not an easy task to criticize some points if the persons are not there. But this has happened very often, as you know, probably. Some of you have seen this kind of a wrestling competence every 5 years in the dialects. And I can say openly from the beginning that there is no hope of dialogue at this point, because everyone is always there to give his own oracle, yeah? And we love us immensely, but at the end, everyone keeps on repeating, I myself, of course, yeah? The same litany. Well, let's concentrate on this point, and they are reproduced in the point B. Yeah? La confection des châteaux de cartes est une activité récréative qui n'exige qu'un matériel réduit. Actually, this is fact, but the material is very reduced. This is exactly the case. Yeah? If we take a case of dialect Pamphylian, which has been absolutely masterly dealt with by Claude Briggs, yeah, we learn that nowadays the corpus contains 276 inscriptions, out of which they are only 2 long texts, and they are extremely lacunary. 3 dedications and plenty of names. This is all the material of Pamphylian. And, as Briggs himself says, the taking into account of these facts, m'ont convaincu, s'il en était encore besoin, qu'on connaît fort mal le Pamphylien. And this says the person who is a master of Pamphylian and of other things too. No? Well, this is the point, yeah? We can play cards with few cards, and the reason is that the cards are few, yeah? This is not that we make a selection of an amount of cards. The material is very, very reduced. And the main question is, what can we hope to take out from this material, which is so reduced? if we concentrate 5 of these points, the first one is, avant de comparer, before comparing the dialects, it is very important to know them. Yeah, this is obviously, yeah? But what can we know? What we can know is very reduced. We shall comment this point a little bit further, yeah? A second point is the constant accusations which reappear constantly that someone who is dealing with comparison is a neo-grammarien and he's dealing with the theory of the changement of the phonetic change, of the uniformity and the regular rule, yeah, of the which should be only confused by means of the analogy. On the one hand, I wanted to say, so the phonetic rules are a fact, and the exceptions are also a fact. Yeah, it is wrong to assume that we operate only with analogy. Analogy is very important, but there are plenty of factors, and the rules do work consequently under the same conditions. And when the same conditions are not fulfilled, we can expect different solutions. Yeah? Well, this point reappears constantly and in a pathetic manner, I would say. Yeah? Number 3, and this is very important. Yeah? Also, it is said that a fact, and this is a statement of fact, every dialect in every time has social and stylistic and geographic variance. This is the pure evidence, and nobody can cast doubt about this. Yeah? Ces considérations, taken from the study of living languages, are obviously to be used also in the case of the old languages. Yeah? So we can assume that every language in every time has behaved as every language today behave. Yeah? But we have, for Pamphilian, 5 inscriptions with some text, yeah? And this is all, yeah? The question is, the major point is, accepting that this is a fact, it is to be hoped that there are many chances to use this criteria for a corpus which contains only stones with very, very scanty material, yeah? A fourth point is in the same line. The ideal in the study of a dialect or language is to get the mechanism of his dynamic and so on and so on. This is very clear. Yeah? The question is always, are we dealing with these problems when we are taking into account the dialect inscriptions? Yeah? And the 5th point, we turn shortly to the page 3, is that obviously the only thing we can get is a start by detailed grammars and full studies of every language before comparing. Yeah, this is clear. Yeah, and this has been followed, but not exactly after this manifesto of '84. Many people have done it before. Yeah, if I may speak about myself only for 15 seconds. Yeah, also this is clear. Yeah. After my book in the 70s, yeah, I have never done again reconstruction, yeah, because it is actually more fascinating other points, yeah. And this is a progress. Anyway, the aim to describe, yeah, has brought to some worrying situations. For example, when some of the persons, of the colleagues present here, we have heard a paper about the syntax of the tabula Heraclensis, when it was said that the nominative occurs normally, the agent, the subject, occurs normally in nominative, except when it is an accusativus cum infinitivo, in which case we have an accusative. Yeah? The conclusion of the paper was that the syntax of the tabula Heraclensis was not very important. Yeah? This kind of worrying situations as very often, yeah, when we see colleagues, we take a dialect text and comment it and so on and so on. At the end of the day, one is not aware that the description has bring something especially interesting. Yeah, what is the point? Yeah, if we get shortly to the points announced here, the first one is do we really know everything, all about the dialect to compare and to reconstruct? Yeah? Also, in this case, the answer can only be known. Let's have a look on Arcadian Cypriot and eventually Mycenaean. We know that Arcadian and Cyprian are separated by many kilometers of water and yeah, very, very far away. Yeah? And a short overview with some of these facts show that they have amazing specific innovations coincident with this. Yeah? We shall deal with this problem again in the next minutes. Yeah? But I assume that we are all aware that to compare and to try to detect a connection between a language A and B, we have not to know all about these dialects. Yeah? And I can give, not for the first time, a banal example, namely the case of Old Persian. Old Persian is attested, the corpus of Old Persian is 200 pages, and the lexicon of Old Persian goes not beyond of the border of 120 or 30 words. And the thematic is absolutely monotonous. Yeah? It's always the achievements of the Achaemenids, yeah? Under the support of Ahura Mazda, and how wonderful are the different kings. Yeah? And in spite of this, nobody can seriously doubt that this language is connected with Indo-Iranian, and especially with Avestan. Yeah? So even worse, we can think of Lycian. Lycian is a miserably attested language in Anatolia, and in spite of this, nobody can, there are at least a dozen of significant features in which this dialect, this language, is clearly more closer to Luwian than to Hittite. And in this case, it is too optimistic to expect that we can get 100% of the material to compare and to establish connections. I shall deal with this further shortly about the problem of Arcadian and Cyprian. A second point is this malediction discourse against the phonetic rules, yeah, which bring to situations as to explain that ornimi and arctos, the O and the A, are free representations of sonants. Yeah? If we have a look on the corresponding forms in Anatolian, we recognize that the contexts are not the same. Well, that is not so bad. Yeah? The third point is the interest, the hope to get the sociolex underlying the text. Yeah? Again, if the corpus is very reduced, it is not so easy to make the difference. We can assume that it has been plenty of social tones and sociolex, but if they are recognizable, this is not so clear. Yeah? An amazing example of this is the explanation of graphos and gropheus in Elean dialects by Mrs. Thévenot, yeah? When she says on the basis of 5 instances that O belong to the low class and A to the upper class. Yeah? And again, some months ago, I have to hear a colleague trying to explain the variants of the names in EAS, EWAS, and ES in Elean on the basis of sociolects. Yeah? So this is the major problem. Yeah? And again, to the 5th point, yeah? We want to know the dialects, and we want to explain everything in the dialect on the basis of the dialect himself. Yeah, this reminds of the point. Yeah, look for Latin etymologies in Italy and not in India. Yeah? Well, but the case is that if we take the dialects within themselves and only there, we get no explanation for the forms. Yeah? If we have shortly a look on, we are in the page 3, number 1, the case of the infinitive dowenai in Cyprian, yeah, dowenai, or the forms of the type domenai in Lesbian. Yeah? The form dowenai is absolutely an hapax, yeah? And in the course of the years, there is no new form of this. Yeah? And the wow is the suspicious object, because the dowenai, the suffix wen, is not attested in other dialects in Greek. Yeah? And if we remain in the borders of this language, we are fatally obliged to explain this in terms of either a glide or something anomalous, and so on and so on. If we have a look in Indo-Iranian, we have davane, and this is practically a matching one-to-one of the form, and the form is to give. Yeah. Also, they are difficult. This I is not so clear to explain. Must be a development within Greek, but to explain the wow as if this was something wrong, it is not the best way. In fact, we think of Attic theinai or Arcadian donai and so on, and these dialects have no wow. And we can quietly assume that the wow was also there, but this is another problem. Yeah. Well, I think how long? Yeah. 5 minutes only.
No, we do have time.
Yeah. No. Thank you. Well, also, I would suggest to ignore, I have to speak too much about this, but probably we can ignore what is said in page 4 about reconstruction of the prehistory of the dialects by an article by Parker, which has been dealt here exactly in this faculty 3 years ago, when the man shows hypercritical points on this. Yeah? According to this, there is nothing is proving when one tries to detect the interest of archaism, innovations, and so on and so on. Yeah? If you have a look on this, we can ignore this, but this extreme skepticism in another line, as Briggs and Bill and so on, brings to nothing actually. Yeah, and even worse it could be if we start with phylogenetics here. Yeah, also reading the paper by Parker, one says in the next time he will explain us that Arcadian and Cyprian has nothing to do. Yeah, and in fact, if you have a look in page 4, just in the middle, there is a paper by Rinch in preparation. Rinch has found no secure shared innovation between Arcadian and Greek. If you have a look on the impressive table presented by Morpurgo Davies about the coincidences, you can hardly cast doubts on this. Please let's turn shortly to page 5. Yeah. In her presentations of the coincidences between Arcadian and Cyprian, Morpurgo Davies concludes at the end, to my surprise, that is another question and one for which some skepticism may be well in order about the connection. Yeah? Also, I think these two iconoclastic. Yeah? Apart from this, the coincidences are clear. And we have number 5, the testimony of Pausanias, which takes traditions about people from Arcadia going to Cyprus. Yeah? Also, if we are ready to deny this, these things are difficult. Yeah? Let's go please to page 6. And I simply refer you to the upper part of the page in which Parker presents the many possibilities, 36 possibilities to explain apparent coincidence between Thessalian and Lesbian. Yeah? And if you have a look on this, I think that it does not deserve to be explained more. Yeah? Also, all is possible. But at the end of the day, the only thing we have are the facts, and the facts show amazing coincidences. Well, let's start now. If I could get 10 minutes, yeah, because I speak too much. Probably this is a problem of coming from the deep south of. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Also, how surprisingly enough, in the last 8 or 10 years, attention has been focused on reconstruction. Something which is, in my opinion, not very productive nowadays in comparison with the synchronic study. Yeah? And at this point, I have to quote, first of all, the case of Pamphilian, which is a very clear case of domain in which it has been thought very much, but at the end, we get the same position which has always been assumed. Also, let's turn to this point. For this point, we have the master work by Briggs on Pamphilian, which is endless help. Yeah, well, and we can state, we are in page 6, that Pamphilian shares isoglossis with Arcado-Cyprian. This is well-known fact. There are also clear isoglosses with West Greek. We have T, and we have hieros, and so on. And we have always known there is a strong component of Asian origin, at least Luwian origin, and that the dialect is a mixed dialect, which is, you can find this. Obviously, to have a try to give a label to this is no help, number two. To call Pamphilian Archaic with Dorian elements, or vice versa, has seamless, yeah? On the other hand, Briggs has presented nice material and interpreted about the component of Anatolian elements there. Yeah. Also, and so, number three, many of these characteristics may be explained perfectly as the result of the contact with the Asian populations. Yeah. And in this point, please let's turn to page 7. This is a very case of fusion and convergence. Yeah. Well, when we have this material and this evidence before the eyes, the only difficulty which remains is actually to specify the grade of integrations of these elements in contact. We have different components, and the question is if the components are fully integrated in the system of the dialect. This is what Briggs calls composé, also in langue composée with insertion, and or if the elements are sporadically attested and are not become structural. This is the point. And one can assume that if the language is so scarcely attested, the questions remain open. Yeah, this was the result. I commented this to Briggs in Berlin. Yeah, and what remains of the history, you can read. J'étais incapable de faire comprendre à l'un des participants de la rencontre la différence entre composition et composite. Yeah, I assume that the difference between elements integrated and not integrated, it is a question of common wisdom. Yeah, the question if this could be consequently applied. Yeah, but well, the problem in this case has always been the element, the Aeolian, the Aeolic element, number 5. Yeah. And there are some questions in contact, namely the representation of this is an error here, of the labiovelars and of the groups of velar plus wow, here's velar plus wow, as labial. The dative plurals in OEC, IC, SC, and the curious imperative in enton with an sthon with O brief, yeah? So this has been denied of any interest by Briggs in his grammar in the year 76. Yeah, and finally, number 7, yeah, the assumption programmatic. Yeah, le pamphilien ne vient pas de quelque part, il est formé là où l'on le trouve, and so on and so on. Yeah, obviously the Pamphilian is created in Pamphilian, has a variegated form in Pamphilian, but we know that they are people coming from abroad. Yeah, and the facts are there, and number 8, Arrian informs us that the people from Side were coming from Kime in Aeolis. Yeah? Well, now number 9, the new evidence of an inscription published in the year 2000 brings some light, namely Petrakis 4 times, and Ageroniou. That is, a month name, Agerranios. This form was attested as a unicum in Lesbos. Yeah? On this basis, Briggs accept now what has always been now, namely that there are a lesbian component in Pamphilian. Yeah? Apart from this, one can add that the labial of Petrakis is not so important, is a normal development, and that we are in page 7 at the bottom B. Also, the form Agerranios was by itself clearly lesbian. Yeah. In the paper by Odo and in the grammar of Odo, this form is described as accidental, as reflecting a phonetic rule which is not anymore active, The fact is that we have agerranios instead of agrianios. This is a forma difficilior, and the coincidence is amazing, yeah? Well, this is the point, and, well, in other words, yeah, at the end of the day, the position accepted by Briggs himself is that lesbian has been present as a component of Pamphilian, yeah? And this was known early in the 19th century, yeah? Well, also, a further problem, I will not know here. In page 8, yeah, I make a excursus about the problem of labiovulars, yeah? The labial representation of labiovular in different languages is not proving, because the reflecting as a labiovular before e as labial is a commonplace in all Kentum languages. In other words, is the normal evolution. What is not normal at all is the palatal legislation which has led to the dental treatment in a part of Greece. In other words, in this part of Greece we have palatalization, and abroad the normal development is to labial, and this happens in Thessaly, in Pamphylia, and in Cyprus, far away from the center of the isogloss. But this is a problem which has also always been dealt with the age of Lejeune and this theory of the second and third wife of representation of the labiovulars, which is, in my opinion, certainly wrong. Well, also, what is amazing, and I will not do with everything, yeah, is a question which reappears systematically, is the implications of the so-called arborescence, Stammbaum, and so on, and so on, yeah? This is a formulation, and this is actually a rough manipulation, because it is not about genealogical trees. All the page 9 is taken from the paper by Briggs, in which he again attacks this assumed three genealogical position and so on, l'arborescence and so on. Yeah? In this paper, you can read plenty of things. Here's a selection, and nothing has been said never in this direction. One thing is that we have languages separated here, and we can assume that probably they are from a common origin. But I don't know one single paper by no dialectologist in which it has not been said that every dialect, irrespective from where it comes, has developed itself in contact with the neighboring dialects and with the people living in the country. Also, and if we read this, la communauté unilingue et monodialectale, there is only, this is wrong. This had never been said and will never say it. And if you have a look in the bibliography, you will say that even people who assumes that the dialect of Boeotia has come from, in part, from Thessaly, Boeotian has developed himself with a component coincident with Thessaly and with own components and with Mycenaean substrate and with neighbor areas and with many people in Boeotia, which probably are not so easy to be recognized in the dialect because the material himself is very reduced. Yeah? And so in other words, this is senseless, and this is a pity that one wastes his time attacking something that nobody has never said and will never say. A last point could be, and this is very, for me personally, is a difficult point, is the explanation of the dialectal prehistory of Thessaly, in which Briggs adheres to the position of one of my best friends, Bruno Elie, and this is the only point in which I have, for one time in 20 years, not been able to agree with Elie. Yeah? But irrespective how we think, the main point remains as follows. Please have a look on page 10 and 11. Yeah? This is a boring repetition of quotations by Elie and Briggs. You know that the wonderful paper by Briggs, a fascinating paper, he has presented it in Berlin, and on the basis of his wonderful knowledge of the prehistory and epigraphy of Thessaly, and he gives a model of the reconstruction of the history, which probably may be explained in terms of dialectology. I don't believe it, yeah, but apart from this, yeah. The question is that we are proud, we are aware that plenty of peoples have coexisted in central Greece. Plenty of them in Thessaly. There are plenty of movements from west to east and from north to south and so on, yeah. And at this point, the paper by Elie is again a wonderful piece, a masterpiece of presentation, yeah. The problem is how could this be applied to the case of the dialects, yeah? And this is, I say, it's probably the only time we have not been agreeing, yeah, Elie and I myself, yeah? And please have a look on page 10, in the number 3. Also, Elie speaks about the coincidences between some place names and religious names and proper names between Thessalia and Boeotia. This is, please, in number 3 in the Nota Bene. Elie speaks about a double toponymique commun aux populations de Thessalie et de Boeotie. And he invokes Onkestos, Pamisos, Coralios, Homole, Arne, Agnai, Minie, Orchomenos, Curalios. Yeah? Also, and he adds, and it was a suggestion of mine, irrespective of their being Indo-European or not. Yeah? Also, at this point, I would say we know that plenty of proper names, of place names, of religious names occur in different places of Greece, not only in Thessaly and in Boeotia. If you have a look on the second NB, there are also non-Greek nouns between Thessaly and Elis. Yeah? We have Olympos and Olympia, Peneus in Thessaly and Peneus. Yeah? And these forms probably are pre-Greek and are there. And it is possible that some people coming from the north could bring them to the south, or vice versa. But to take the implication that these people bringing A to B has brought a dialect, and a part of dialect, this is pure fantasy, in my opinion. Yeah? And at the end of the day, what remains is that this is wonderful. If you have a look in page 11, yeah? In page 11, yeah? Also, at the end of this long presentation, yeah, it is said that this is very plausible. It may be very plausible, but what one can hardly assume is that pieces of dialect could be connected with this on the basis of a material which has been said in 6 lines by Elie. At the end, yeah, the argument is that, yeah, en ordonnant ainsi chronologiquement les démigrations, Elie reste prisonnier du schéma de García Ramón. This has no sense. Yeah? Good. This is the point, and it is the best moment to stop here. The most important, the most original contribution would be now, and this is about the Boeotian. Yeah, but they are all in the same line. Yeah, this is the main idea, and what, in my opinion, remains of this case. I have presented my own traumata and problems, but probably they are the problems common to all of us. Yeah. Reconstruction is very interesting. They are arguments, they are positions which may be reasonable, yeah? But synchrony is better. Synchrony in the light of comparison and of other dialects, which bring endless resolutions. In other words, new or old problems is practically the same. Yeah? The importance is that the problems are really open and may bring to a solution. Thank you very much for your nice attention.
Many thanks to García Ramón for this detailed introduction into the traumata of ancient Greek dialectology.
Of my own.
Your own. It appears that we have some minutes for discussion. Are there any questions? Ερωτήσεις προς τον ομιλητή, κατά προτίμηση στα αγγλικά ή στα γερμανικά ή στα γαλλικά ή στα ισπανικά, όπως ακούσατε.
Questions about the last pages would be more than welcome. This is my only opportunity to tell you about this again. Hi.
Just a small question about the Attic as a Greek dialect. Having made a very detailed, having presented a very detailed state of the art in Greek dialects, I was a bit upset because you didn't mention the Attic as a dialect. I know that that is the
I have.
the attitude for the professional dialectologist, but that's like
No, I'm sorry. Thank you. You know, I have ignored many things here. It's clear. Actually, Attic is a wonderful problem. I have quoted your words on this domain and others. And actually, the major problem about the tablets of 3D and so on. This is another point. Of course. At this point, maybe you are mentioning this, exactly the problem of the les ardoises of the academia.
What's your opinion about the two different descriptions we have at the moment about the phonology of the Attic and the classical period? On the one side, we have, let's say, the traditional view accepted by three. On the other side, we have the modern view accepted by Theodorson and most of the Greek
Briggs himself, as you know, I am not very competent in this domain. Also, and the question is, I would tend to assume that Theodorson and Briggs are in the best way, probably, On the other hand, and thank you for mentioning this, what we are not sure is about the chronology of the documents of the academia, This is the major problem, If they are actually, maybe shortly say for students and so on, Also, the question is that in these small documents of the academia, we have forms with clear instances of Itacism, Demos, Damosthenes, and so on, And the major question is, obviously, if this is dated in the 5th century, this clearly means that the Itacism is already got at this time, at least by some groups. This is a very clear-cut case, The first problem is of epigraphical order, And I think that the manner of Theodorson and Briggs is the more productive, but the question is the chronology of the texts, And in this case, Threati, who has been dealing with them systematically, has just published a monography in the last 3 or 4 years, in which he gives massive arguments in favor of the Hellenistic date of this data. And this has also, in this case, even if the model of Theodorson and Briggs is better, they cannot be applied to this case, But maybe I remember something about this, Also, the question is that on the basis of this text of the academia, and assuming that they were dated in the 5th century, I have to hear something harsh-throbbant, Also, probably you too, Meyer-Brügger was also there, Also, when our friend Diu has argued that the persons who has Itacism were children and mother, but not the fathers, So this, because it was close to a school, and the children was the mother in our macho society, and the Iotacism has started in the language or in the sociolect of women and children. Further, new material has brought, if I remember correctly, material from a domain of soldiers. And now the new sociolect is those of the soldiers. And according to this logic, the most traditional point could be that Iotacism has been reached in some instances, in sub-social groups, probably, but we can hardly detect which exact social group on the basis of the now available evidence to us. But thank you that you quote this.
I think we must go on with our session. So,
thank you.
Other questions in the coffee break. Our next speaker, ο επόμενος ομιλητής είναι ο καθηγητής Michael Meyer-Brügger, τακτικός καθηγητής της Συγκριτικής και Ινδοευρωπαϊκής Γλωσσολογίας στο Ελεύθερο Πανεπιστήμιο του Βερολίνου. Θα αρκεστώ να αναφέρω μόνο δύο από τα best seller του. Το πρώτο είναι το Griechische Sprachwissenschaft του 1992 και το ακόμα μεγαλύτερο best seller είναι το Indogermanische Sprachwissenschaft, ήδη στην ένατη έκδοση και στα εγγλέζικα Indo-European Linguistics και τα δύο από τον εκδοτικό Eco de Gruyter. Ο κύριος Μάιερ Μπρούγκερ είναι επίσης γνωστός για ένα τιτάνιο έργο το οποίο περατώθηκε υπό τη δική του την αιγίδα και εννοώ την αποπεράτωση του Lexikon des Frühgriechischen Epos, αυτό το μνημιώδες λεξικό της αρχαϊκής επικής ποίησης, ολοκληρώθηκε το 2010 και μια δεύτερη δραστηριότητα του κυρίου Μάιερ Μπρούγκερ, εξίσου σημαντική, είναι ο συνεκδότης μάλλον, του πολύ γνωστού στους κλασικούς φιλολόγους και όχι μόνο σε αυτούς, περιοδικού του Γκλώτα. Μιχαήλ. Ο τίτλος είναι Ancient Greek Dialects and their Significance for the Reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European.
First of all, I have to thank for this invitation to this beautiful center, to this growing center for the ancient Greek language. Now I am going back in the past, far beyond the old Greek dialects. So I need only this for positioning. Yeah, this please. So I start in the past with Proto-Indo-European, and then going near our time. First of all, in the Balkan, there was a Proto-European Balkan community. For the settlement of the future Greeks, I accept the archaeologists who are saying that the Greeks are coming to Greece 2500 BC and not 2000. And that means that we have probably 1000 years until the Mycenaean time. And from Mycenaean to the first dialectal documents in the 8th century, you have once more 400 or 500 years. Now, I start with 2 points on my handout. We have to be sure that for the reconstruction of the Indo-European language, every Indo-European language is important, not only ancient Greek. But Greek has some special points what are important. We have old texts in Mycenaean time, and we have dialectal diversity. For instance, we have old T forms in the North Greek dialects, like Feronti, and we have in the south, also in Mycenaean, C forms, like Fer. Thanks. In the following, I will give you 2 examples. First, an example for the reconstruction of the so-called laryngeals. It is well known that the Greek language as a whole is important for the reconstruction of a special sort of consonants, the so-called laryngeals. With the help of Greek, but also with the help of Armenian, Phrygian, Indo-Iranian, the Anatolian languages, their Proto-Indo-European character can be determined. And we are speaking about laryngeal 1, laryngeal 2, and laryngeal 3. Especially in the position between consonants, Greek is clarifying. We have tetos from techto, statos from strchto, and totos from tochto. Latin shows only A forms, factus, datus, etc. Or Old Indic has only I forms. Other important examples are, for instance, the verb to be. We can reconstruct, also with the help of Greek, the verb to be with laryngeal 1, with the form ches. Or the word for name. Here also, Old Greek and also the dialects are important. Now, on page 2, I show you a new example, the word for wool. Lane is a common Indo-European word. We have attestation in Hittite, Old Indic, in Younger Avestan, in Lithuanian, in Old High German, and in Latin. In Latin, we have in addition the verb vello, to pull out. And that means that probably lana meant first, literally, the plucked material. Normally in the handbooks, the Lane word is interpreted as Proto-Indo-European chwölch nech, and to be combined with the verbal root welch, to strike. But the semantics does not recommend it. Latin vello means to pull out, but Greek healon has an entire other meaning. Martin Peters shows in a very good article in Die Sprache that forms like Hesychius leina means area, Kyprioi, suggests an old E, leno, and not lano. Therefore, a preform chwilchnech has to be reconstructed. And the summary to be drawn is, we have to accept a new root, chwelch, to pull out, and to separate it from chwelch with laryngeal 3. Chwelch with laryngeal 1 is attested in Latin, velo, but otherwise it is replaced by the root pek, in Greek, in ancient Greek, peko. For sure, in the phonology, Old Greek helps us also in other domains to reconstruct the language. For instance, for the famous law detected by Grassmann. In this case, we can see that in Greek, the Grassmann law was only active after the change of BH to PH, and so forth. As you can see, a root like peitomai started with paid, becoming paid, and then dissimilated to pate. Also in the case of accentuation, we have old situations who help us also to reconstruct details in the mother language. The lesson to be learned, I guess, from the phonology is that Greek has an extraordinary, well-conserved, always well-pronounced, and clear vocal system. This is useful for the reconstruction, and useful are also the dialectal diversifications. For instance, the famous A to I. Now on page 3, I take another example from the morphology. In this case, I am interested in the formation of the famous S aorist. As we all know, classical literature is usually Ionic Attic. The Homeric language is special, starting in oral time with Ionic and Aeolic features. The inscriptions are from all area, starting in the 8th century. Here I have a paradigm of the aorist, the normal paradigm, in the indicative, in the optative, and in the subjunctive. In the indicative, we have, as you know, in the medium, epaidoisamen, epaidoiso, contracted from epaidoisazo, epaidoisato, and at the end, epaidoisanto. In the active, epaidosa, epaidosas, epaidosen, epaidoisamen, epaidoisate, epaidosan. And it's clear that the Greek, the normal Greek aorist, has a sa suffix, and immediately after the secondary endings. And a point to discuss is the third singular se. In the optative, you have epaidosamen, epaidoisaio from epaidoisaizo, epaidoisaito, epaidoisainto. In the active, you have paidoisaimi, paidoiseias, and beside paidoisais, the more regular form. The same for paidoiseie, paidoisai. In the plural, paidoisaimin, paidoisaite, paidoiseian. Here, you have a sa suffix, the I morpheme of the optative, and the secondary endings. Problematic is the Seya form. And in the subjunctive, we have a long vowel subjunctive in the medium and in the active. And it's clear that we have a suffix, a thematic suffix so se. We have the subject morpheme oe, and then the primary endings. Now, we have in addition informations from the dialects, especially from Crete. In the optative, we have kosmesie, dikaxie, and the third plural, verxien. In the subjunctive, we have short vowel subjunctives in Crete and in Homer. And I have noted the handbooks by Biel and Chantraine. The Mycenaean facts are also important. We have dexato with a, the sa suffix, and we have also a form like eleuterose. Now page 4. The reconstruction, the S forms are found in Slavic, in Indo-Iranian, in Tocharian, in Latin, and so forth. And also we have the information in the handbook, for instance, Leaf 2, the lexicon of the Indo-Germanischen Verben, Meiser, and also Johanna Narten. What we can conclude is that the S suffix was of Proto-Indo-European date. And of Proto-Indo-European date was also the formation of S directly followed by the endings. The indicative was formed by the S and the secondary endings. The root had ablaut, long E in the singular, and E grade in the plural. The subjunctive was formed by S, then the subjunctive morpheme OE, and the primary or secondary ending. And we have to separate the desiderative forms who are very similar. And in the optative, you can see the article by Chazanov, for instance, and he tells us that the pre-Proto-Indo-European optative was formed directly to the root, but in normal Proto-Indo-European times, he had the S. And now the way, how to think about the way from Proto-Indo-European to Greek. Here you have my 3 points here. And for the discussion, I refer to the very good article made by Ernst Riesch, my teacher. Page 5. We can have the following scenario. The Proto-Greek aorist formation was athematic, and he was formed with the suffix S. In the indicative, we had the suffix S and immediately after the endings zm, z, and zt, znt, etc. In the subjunctive, we had the forms short vowel subjunctives, deixo, deixomi, etc. And in the optative, we had deixi and the endings. The subjunctive in Greek continues these old forms, as we have seen in Homer and in the dialects, in some dialects. And the long vowel in the subjunctive is a simply analogical clarification. More difficult is the optative. Creed guards also the old form, Werksien, Deixien. And Jasanoff and others suppose that the famous Aeolic optative is a replacement of the earlier old optatives. And for sure, the normal sa-sai optative is a normal formation from the indicative. Interesting is that the indicative, the sa aorist, is generated in all Greek dialects. And as we know, probably one source is the third plural in the medium. Zanto goes, zunto goes to zanto and to zanto, and from there you have also the singular sato. A problem is the third singular deixe, and here we are not sure if this E is taken from the perfect, if this is old or the new. In any case, at the end, all Greeks had a new, clear system. An indicative in sa, an optative in sai, and separated from the origin, a long vowel subjunctive. The question is, what have we to think about this development? In this case, the common Greek language was the same for all dialects. All dialects started with the same paradigm. And I guess that in this long time of 1,000 years after the settlement, the Greeks developed this clear new system, probably before Mycenaean time. This example is also important for the discussion of the so-called Proto-Greek. And Proto-Greek in these days is much disputed, and I have cited 3 modern articles on the next page. There is an important article by Garrett, and Garrett claims that it hardly makes sense to reconstruct Proto-Greek. And he starts the Greek development only in the time between Linear B and the re-emergence of writing. Then we have also an article by Briggs and an article by Heinal, and they have the references given on this page. Briggs and also Heinal underline the importance of the Balkan time. And they say that Albanian, Macedonian, Phrygian, and Thracian are important for this stage. And I'm very interested to learn more about, for instance, Macedonian for the northwest Greek area, because this area seems to be important. Now, other examples, there are only a few mentioned here. The verb to be, the participle, for instance, of the verb to be with upload. You have the first plural men and mes, important for the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European. We have, for instance, the genitive in Attic, poleos, from poleos. It is interesting for the I stems in Indo-European. A good example, another good example would be the suffix of the participle perfect active, the was suffix. It is preserved in the feminine, in uja, from uzja in all dialects. But the masculine and neuter forms are replaced by a form in vot or want. And here we could also demonstrate the Proto-Indo-European base and the Greek dialectal developments. For the two other important subjects like lexicon and syntax, only 2 or 3 possible examples to be discussed. For instance, in the lexicon, the use stems from type polus are also important for the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European, because in the beginning, like Strunk, they proposed pulhu with a special laryngeal treatment, but probably now we have to say that polu has an old O. But it is another question, but an important question for the reconstruction of these adjectives. And only to say a word about Beke's new etymological dictionary of Greek, here I say that he all too often says it is pre-Greek. If Beke's something can't understand, then he says it's not Greek. But if you have a closer look, usually Greek has Greek and Greek etymology. And for the syntax too, we have good ideas about, or the informations about the syntax. For instance, the famous verbal position made first, or described first by Wackernagel, or the famous plural panta rei, and so forth and so forth. And I would say, to conclude, that the old Greek, the Greek language, with his dialect, is much, much important for the reconstruction, and therefore it is right also to have a good and a very good knowledge of ancient Greek. And I would say also that a comparatist has to have a good Greek knowledge. Thanks a lot.
Ευχαριστούμε τον καθηγητή Μάιερ Μπρούγκερ για αυτή την σαφή παρουσίαση της σημασίας των αρχαίων ελληνικών διαλέκτων για την ανασύνθεση της πρωτοϊνδογερμανικής. We have some minutes before the coffee break for discussion. Are there any questions? No questions, only coffee. Yes.
Now, for sure, I have always the example that if we would know Greek only after the fall of Constantinople, then we would have also a lot of informations, but not all we have now with Mycenaean and ancient Greek times. Okay. It would be the same like Albanian or Lithuanian, only attested in the 15th century. For sure, for sure. Yeah. No, Tzakonian for sure. From 700 today. And modern Greek too. For sure.
Ο κύριος Χατζόπουλος.
It's not my own subject, but it's the subject, for instance, by Brix or also by Heinal and others. And the Armenian language, also the Albanian language, have features in common with Greek. And we have to have an idea how these communities, these common features, have arrived. Yeah.
Because that community may have happened in 3,000, 2,500, or is there a way to calculate the time needed for linguistic phenomena to take place in a primitive society?
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem. But we also have to have the help of the archaeologists in the future. And as I saw yesterday in a map, we have also to consider that the Greeks had the shortest way from the Proto-Indo-European so-called Heimat to Greece. Because Lithuanian and so forth, they have had a longer way. And it could be that only one generation is needed to have a spread of common forms. But we have to find out in the future these questions.
May I have an intervention here? Well, comparative evidence and comparative studies show on the time elapsing from the time of split of common community of languages to a split, and then to the development of completely different languages. The rough calculation is 500 years. And this can be seen from the development of Romance languages later during the historical period, and also from Germanic to modern Germanic and English, etc. So it is a rough calculation, but if we have combined evidence from other sources like archaeology, philology, and other such areas, then the combined evidence can lead us to some more concrete conclusion on that. But as a theoretical idea, as a model, this is what usually is taken 5 centuries.
Ευχαριστούμε και τους δύο μιλητές της πρώτης συνεδρίας. Παρακαλώ να περάσετε έξω για το καφέ, τον οποίο χρειαζόμαστε από ό,τι φαίνεται.